Hello everyone, Mr. Price here with the next iteration of our read aloud. As you guys know, we're reading Because of Mr. Terupt by Rob Boyer, and where we left off, we had heard a few chapters from Alexia, Anna, and Danielle. And as we know, the girls have kind of mended things when they all bumped into each other while visiting Mr. Terupt. But what was new was Alexia mentioned that she thought she saw Peter leaving when it was just her talking to Mr. Terupt. And then the last thing that we had read was from Danielle and how she had enjoyed going over to Anna's house and wanted to do it again, but then she also, had those positive thoughts for Mr. Terupt and was wishing him well. And today we pick up with Luke. I didn't think it would be as difficult going to see Mr. Terupt the second time. I knew what to expect. I was wrong. Seeing Mr. Terupt in that bed again wasn't any easier. I thought he would look better. I thought he was improving, but he looked the same. Still just lying there in bed. Surrounded by the same beeps and tubes and monitors and noises from the hall. It was all just the same. I felt the lump in my throat growing. Mom's hand touched my shoulder. She saw it happening too. I stood at the side of his bed in a state of disbelief, feeling helpless. Then the doctor walked in. At least I figured he was the doctor. He had salt and pepper hair, a white coat, and a smart face. He nodded to us and then moved toward Mr. Terupt. He checked some numbers and fluids, pulled back Mr. Terupt's eyelids to look at his pupils with his penlight, and then started to leave. "Wait," I said, "wait." He stopped and turned around. "Are you Mr. Terupt's doctor?" I asked. "Yes, I'm Dr. Wilkins, one of the physicians." "Is Mr. Terupt going to get better?" I saw him take a big breath. He looked at my mother first, then me. "I don't know, son." "What's wrong with him? He's in a coma, but what's wrong with him?" Dr. Wilkins pulled some chairs over for all of us to sit in. He sat across from me. "Mr. Terupt did a lot of wrestling while growing up, and even into college," he started to explain. "It turns out he had to give it up because he suffered multiple concussions along the way. These concussions have weakened his brain in certain regions. The snowball that was thrown hit one of those weaker ones, the temporal $word region, to be exact, and it cracked his skull." And just to be clear, that's Luke thinking that that's a $word when the doctor says the temporal region. And you remember Luke, he loved that $word project, and so every chapter that he does, he points out words that are $words. So anyways, the snowball that was thrown hit one of those weaker areas, the temporal region to be exact, and it cracked his skull. Dr. Wilkins looked very sorry as he said this. I don't know if he expected questions, but I had them. "Does that mean Mr. Terupt wouldn't be in a coma if he hadn't suffered multiple concussions?" I asked. "I can't say for sure, but probably not." "What do you do now? Just wait?" Dr. Wilkins took another big breath. I got the sense there was more to the equation, more bad news or news he was hoping not to share. He glanced at my mother, who nodded, giving him the okay to explain. I didn't want a sugar-coated report. I wanted the facts, and my mom knew that. "Mr. Terupt has some bleeding going on behind this crack, and the blood is collecting $word in his brain. We hoped it would stop, but it hasn't. He'll need to undergo brain surgery so we can clamp the bleeding vessels. And then he'll be okay? If it works, hopefully, yes." I heard the word "if" loud and clear. "And if it doesn't?" I said. "Brain surgery is risky. There's always the chance the patient won't recover." "You mean die?" I said. My mom put her arm around me. "What's your name, son?" "Luke." "Yes, Luke. Your teacher could die during or as a result of the surgery. But I'm going to do my very best not to let that happen." I got up and stood by Mr. Terupt's bed. I looked at him. Dr. Wilkins got up and stood next to me. "He's a pretty special teacher, isn't he?" the doc said. I could only nod. Speaking would have made me cry like a baby. I'll do my best, Luke. That much I can promise. He squeezed my shoulder and left the room. Brain surgery, I thought. Mr. Terupt might never come back. I ran out into the hall. Dr. Wilkins! I yelled. He turned around. Does anyone else in my class know what you told me? Dr. Wilkins walked back to me. We didn't know anything about his concussions at first, he said, but another teacher, Ms. Newberry, was able to provide us with Mr. Terupt's background information. I guess Mr. Terupt had told her about his wrestling days, and it's a good thing, because we have no other contact person for him. I stood there, quiet. No other person. There was nobody for Mr. Terupt. But to answer your question, there is another student in your class who knows what I told you, Dr. Wilkins said. Who? I think he said his name was Peter. I was silent. Peter? I didn't think Peter had been here. Dr. Wilkins turned to leave. Wait, I said. Does Peter know about the concussions? Or just the brain surgeries next? Just about the brain surgery. Why do you ask? Because Peter threw the snowball. And that takes us to the month of April. And we have a chapter from Jessica. Act 10, Scene 1. Mrs. Williams assumed responsibilities as our teacher. She recognized and acknowledged our huge mess and that our feelings, despite our being just 5th graders, were very real. I respected Mrs. Williams for her courageous act, but it didn't change a thing. Mr. Terupt still lay motionless inside the vast whiteness and beeping of that building. Our classroom remained as lifeless as our teacher. We needed Mr. Terupt back. Things happen for a reason. That's what I told Jeffrey. Did I believe that? Sometimes. What were the reasons for my dad leaving us? I haven't figured that out yet. And what are the reasons for Mr. Terupt's predicament? I've decided they're different for everyone, and maybe they're not there at all for others. I see the reason for Alexia now. Without this accident, I'm not sure she would have made it back as my friend. Without this accident, I bet Danielle never would have made it over to Anna's house. But what about someone like Luke or Jeffrey? I don't see any reason for either one of them, and I can't find any reason for me. And another chapter from Luke. Classroom persisted in secreting, unbroken, quietness. I stayed quiet too, even though I had a lot bottled up inside me about Mr. Terupt's brain surgery. Peter knew about it, but he didn't have all the details. I know he blames himself. You can see it. Ever since the accident, he walks around like a mummy. He should be blaming himself. He threw the snowball, but if it had hit anyone than Mr. Terupt, I don't think we'd be experiencing a tragedy like this. That's what Peter needs to know. It doesn't make everything all better, but it might help ease his pain. I can't tell him, though. No one is talking to him. But that's not why I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to find out why he threw that snowball. Danielle. It was springtime. I sat on the front porch with Grandma after church. She drank her coffee black because she's tough, and I sipped some iced tea, unsweetened because I hope to be tough like her. I love these moments with Grandma. There's nothing like a New England spring, Danielle. She said, you endure the harsh winter, and because of that, you learn how to really appreciate the new season. I knew what she was talking about. The snow had melted and the birds had flown back, singing and praising. Flowers popped up and buds appeared. The animals on the farm acted frisky. Time to rejoice, but I couldn't, and Grandma noticed. I bet you in other parts of this country, where there's no real winter, people miss out on spring, Grandma said. That's just a shame. I nodded. This spring was different, though. My teacher still slept, and this weighed on me and sucked the happiness out of everything. I felt like I was still in my winter slumber. Danielle, let's pray. I bowed my head and closed my eyes. I figured Grandma was going to thank our God for the beautiful weather and the gift of spring. That would have been fine, but she took me by surprise. Dear God, Mr. Terupt needs you. Now, I don't understand teachers these days, but I've come to realize that this Mr. Terupt is as good as they come. I've seen how he has touched my granddaughter and her friends. He's special. You don't need 'em up there yet, so you make sure you give 'em back to us real soon. Amen. Grandma had understood the important stuff. Her prayer made me feel better. I always feel better with Grandma on my side, even when she's telling God what to do. Thank you, Grandma, I said. I love you. I love you, sweetie. I'll keep praying for him. I stayed in my winter slumber even after Grandma's prayer, but then, unexpectedly, I started to awake. Not because of encouraging signs from Mr. Terupt, but because of Anna's shocking news. In a chapter from Anna, I pumped my legs back and forth on the swings. I needed to get some momentum going so that I wasn't just sitting with my feet dangling in the puddle below me. Danielle, Jessica, and Lexi sat on the swings too. Danielle right next to me. It was nice to be outside for recess again, now that the snow was gone. Charlie was at my house when I got home from school yesterday. I said. Danielle's pumping stopped. Mom told me they were just sharing a cup of coffee and some conversation. Danielle pumped slowly again, but still didn't say anything. If Charlie marries my mom, what would that make us? I went on. Sisters! Danielle put her feet down and hopped off her swing. She turned to face me. My pumping slowed. Something wrong? She looked right at me. Anna, Charlie will never marry your mother, Danielle said. My family would never allow it. I stopped my swing. Jessica and Lexi stopped theirs too. Why? I asked. My family, Danielle started to say, and then her chin and voice lowered. My family doesn't approve of your mother. I felt like I'd just got run over by Charlie's red truck. My whole body grew weak. But my mom's a good person, I said. I know, Danielle said. She scuffed the mud with her foot. But it's not that easy. If it weren't for Mr. Terupt's accident, I don't think I would have ever been allowed to go over to your house. I learned something that day. Even after all this time, my mom was still ostracized for something that happened long ago. And because I had contributed to Mr. Terupt's accident, I was going to pay for it for the rest of my life. And that's where we're going to stop today, guys. Um, Nothing super eventful going on, but, a few things that are developing with Luke having that tidbit of knowledge about Mr. Terupt's condition that and then confirming that Peter was the one that Alexei had seen leaving. He has been going to the hospital, but Luke has not relieved him of his guilt yet by sharing the information that Mr. Terupt hurt himself previously while wrestling. But now we have this little bit of a conflict between Danielle and Anna. I mean, maybe not so much a conflict as much as Danielle just hurt Anna's feelings by what she said. We'll see what develops. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.